Who says you need to be a pro painter to get good results in quick, sharp fashion? Commission painters and snobs, that's who. Every one of them a slapper. My name is Benji, and this is Marvel Crisis Protocol's Crossbones Speed Painting Guide for the Casual Painter. So, as it will become abundantly clear, I am not a pro painter, but one thing I do know is that the learning curve to make a miniature look good on the tabletop is not as steep as you might think, and that's what these videos are here for, to help you find the right balance between speed and quality. At the core of this guide and what we'll be using is the Citadel Contrast paint range, which more or less allows you to get the same effect as applying a base coat and a wash all in one go. But because you might already have or prefer a different range of paints, we'll pop the names of the closest equivalents up on screen as we go. But before we go onward bound, please do take a moment to subscribe to the channel to keep yourself in the bubble of awesome, and smash that like button to help a channel out. First things first then, you need to prime your model. We're opting to use the complimentary Rathbone spray can, as it gives a more natural and organic look when the contrast is applied. Of course, if you plan to use a different type of primer, make sure it's a white or off-white, because these paints just ain't gonna work on darker tones. Now we get to some actual colour as we apply a coat of wildwood on all the straps, of which there are quite a few on the legs and torso. Note we opted not to paint the belt or the sheath for the knife in brown. This part can get a bit tricky because we're dealing with fairly watery paints on narrow parts of the model, but let a medium amount of paint soak onto the brush and apply north to south as much as possible, moving the miniature upside down and inside out more than you do your paintbrush. And don't worry too much about being perfect, because we'll be applying a darker colour over any mistakes later on. Next we uncork some lead belcher, temporarily steering away from contrast paints as they're not the best at getting good results with silver or gold. We applied this on the knuckle duster, base of the boots, gun and metal plates, and we initially did this as an experiment to see if we could get better results down the line. But if you want to cut some more time out of this process, you can apply some black Templar to these areas when we get to that colour very shortly. We'll be highlighting over this coat with some lead belcher later on anyway, and so the gains of doing it this way are nominal at best. We then added a sneaky layer of snakebite leather on the knife handle, and also added some lead belcher that we forgot onto the pommel. But once again, you can skip the lead belcher part if you so desire. Next we let our hair down a bit and apply a good old splash of black Templar on the brush to go all over the remainder of the model, the costume, the gloves, and as I've already mentioned, this is where we go over the metal parts anyway. And as you can see, it's still viscous enough to almost completely obscure what's underneath, which can be best seen on the metal plate on Mr. C's back. Just make sure you apply a decent amount of paint on the model and keep an eye out for any excess pooling in the recesses, which you can just lift out with an empty brush. Then it's time to put some colour in our mini's cheeks with some GULLMAN flesh on the arms and neck, applying the same principles as we did when applying the black Templar, not being shy with the paint and looking out for ugly looking pools in the recesses. We also applied some of this into the eye slits, as the eyes will be heavily shaded anyway, and there's not enough space to go to town trying to make much more out of his little peepers. Another small but necessary step then was to add a liberal coat of apothecary white to the face mask. That's more than sufficient to conceal the off-white cream hue of the undercoat wraithbone, and just as importantly create some shading in the recesses in the eye and mouth areas. Jobs are good and then for the mask. And then in no time at all we were painting the holy concrete base in Basilicanum Grey, making sure we applied a decent amount to get the best coverage possible. Beware though, even on this flat surface you'll need to deal with pooling and also uneven application, but there's no real problem in letting any excess fall over the sides, because no matter how hard you wish it would be, you're not going to get a great finish around the edge of the base with these paints. But as you'll see by the end of the video, an even coat of Abaddon Black is a nice option to finish. And there you have the quickest, dirtiest, easiest way to get Crossbones tabletop ready. Yes, contrast paints do have some limitations, but they're few and far between for what you get in return. Now, whilst that might be more than enough for what you need, we're going to continue our journey and add a few highlights and finishing touches to the model. Again, nothing too excessive in the spirit of this video, but for just a little extra time at the paint station, we can get some nice results. Replicating where we started off, then we turn to our friend, some Steel Legion drab, to highlight the raised and prominent parts of all the straps, just to give them a touch more in the way of contrast up against the black costume. One thing to note with all these highlighting layers is that you may need a slightly smaller brush than you've been using up until now to soak up all that contrast goodness. Otherwise you might find yourself completely covering up all your good work so far. We then go back to Leadbelcher, and oh what an odyssey it's been. My thinking with the black Templar over the Leadbelcher was that it would act as a conventional black wash, but that extra viscosity just smothered the silver. So here we are with the Leadbelcher going back over all the metal parts with some highlights. And so in future, the base coat will be black Templar, then I'll just highlight with this. We also took the opportunity to highlight a bunch of buttons and fasteners on the model that just need the very tip of your brush to do the job. We then opted for some good old fashioned CADAN flesh tone to finish off predominantly the arms, but a very light touch on the neck as well. And all the highlights we've talked about so far have been mostly edge highlighted, with a fine brush focusing on thin lines. But this flesh tone is more like adding an extra layer, still prioritising the raised parts but giving a great deal more coverage than we'd done with the other highlights. And that is the model proper, done and dusted, leaving just those final touches to the base where we dry brushed some Administratum grey over the lot. Now, it's not always the easiest thing dry brushing over flat surfaces, so be sure to err on the side of getting the bulk of the paint off the brush before dusting it on. And this, if you remember, is where we also applied the most even coat of Abaddon black we could muster, around the very edge. And that, as they say, is that. I'm sure many of you will be happy with just the contrast paint steps, but it just goes to show what can be achieved with minimal time investment, no matter how far through the video you ventured. Stay tuned for more speed painting guides for those that want less time painting, more time gaming. Alas, I have been the voice of Benji, and this video has ended.